The main theme here, of course, it goes back to the study of Torah, and how when we study Torah, and not just study with our minds, but study with our actions too, then God encloses us, so to speak. Then he becomes a part of us. And by him becoming a part of us, it refines the mind, refines the part of the body that is used to do that mitzvah, whether it's the hand that gives charity, the feet that walk to do a good deed, whatever it may be. Then really we become divine. By enclosing ourselves with the divine, we also can become divine. So let's continue. Continue at the bottom of page 150. Does anyone want to read? Bottom of 150, right here.
Okay.
Thank you, Margot. Go for it, please.
And because in the case of knowledge of the Torah is enclosed within the soul and the mind of a person and is absorbed in them, it is called bread and the food of the soul. At various places in the scripture, the Torah is compared to bread. For example, come partake of my bread, Proverbs 9:5. The Torah that a person learns is absorbed and assimilated by his mind, just as the physical food is absorbed and assimilated by the body. The mitzvot, on the other hand, are the clothes of the soul, which enclose the soul and weave a garment of light that envelops it end to end. In fulfilling a mitzvah, a person expresses himself in the manner and form of divine desire. In studying Torah, not only does he express himself through its ideas, but the Torah is also being thought within him, formulated by his mind, molded by its characteristics and qualities.
Right. I would say the only difference between bodily food and soulful food, which is the Torah, as mentioned here, bread and the food for the soul, is that bodily food creates what has waste. And at the end of the day, we need to go to the restroom to let go of that waste. Divine food doesn't have any waste. Why? Because it's divine. It's reminiscent of the manna in the desert. It's interesting to note, and the Talmud points this out, that for 40 years we ate manna that came from the heavens, and that was our food in the desert. But it didn't have, Jews didn't need to go to the restroom for 40 years. Why? Because it was divine food. So divine food doesn't have any waste. It's divine. The waste means that it's not necessary. But divine is necessary. So they didn't need to go to the restroom for 40 years. I would say it's the same thing here for this type of food. That's the main difference. Yes, both of them are foods, but this food is absorbed completely by the soul because and there's no waste in it because it's divine. What this also means is a point that he made in the past, and that is that a person should always study Torah, should always do a mitzvah, even if the intention is not there. Why? Because just that mere divine connection creates something within the person. It almost electrifies him. And that electrification can create some sort of movement in the person that leads him to refine himself, to grow, to become better, to do better things. So that is really the effect that this food has. Rabbi Stein quotes one verse, come partake of my food, that the Torah is called bread. The Torah is also called water. And it's compared to other types of foods too. Sometimes it's compared to delicacies, ganiot, in the words of the prophet. I think that the difference between all of those different descriptions, whether it's water, it's bread, like he says here, delicacies, or other descriptions that are given to the food of the Torah, is not necessarily regarding the nourishment of the Torah. Delicacies nourish us, water nourishes us. They all have that element of nourishment, but it depends on also the type of study that we launch ourselves in. Sometimes the study is a study in which we are just quenching our thirst, water, no matter what, we can just absorb anything, just give me water. And any part of the Torah then is good. And sometimes we relate to the study of the Torah as something that needs to elevate us or maybe enrich us. That's when we're looking for delicacies in the Torah. Sometimes it's bread, sustenance, the Shmiya sustenance. So the Torah is no doubt a nourishing entity, but it's up to us to decide whether we want to relate to it as water, as bread, as delicacies, or other things too.
On Shavuot, we describe the Torah as milk, And Israel is the land of milk and honey. And that's why we eat cheesecake on Shavuot.
Right. That's right. Exactly. One of the reasons. That's correct. And yeah, there are other reasons too, but that's one of the reasons. You're right. So you see, the Torah can be milk also sometimes. Now, the question is whether it's the milk that there's two spins on that take. The other reasons why we eat dairy, but one is because God was leading us to the promised land, which is the land that flows with milk and honey. The other reason is because milk is really the first food we have as babies. As soon as we're born, we have the milk of our mothers. And on Shavuot, we were born as a nation. Yes, it's interesting, just an interesting point. We were called a nation years before Shavuot, but not by God, by Pharaoh. Pharaoh said, hey, there's a nation here that is multiplying. We should, drown all their baby boys. God only called us a nation once we proved to him that we could be a nation. Once we went through Egypt, redeemed ourselves from Egypt, and then accepted the Torah, that's when God said, okay, now you deserve this title called nation. And then that's when he called us a nation. We were created as a nation. We were babies as nations, just like babies drink milk. So too, we drink milk on Shavuot to remind ourselves of that birth we had as a nation. But it's an interesting...
By the way, the gematria of Chalav is 40.
Right. That's another reason. Right. That's right. And that's because Moses stayed for 40 days and 40 nights on Mount Sinai to receive the rest of the Torah. So Chalav reminds us of that. Chalav meaning milk, which, as you mentioned, William, that's right, has the gematria as a numerical value as 40. But going back to the nation, I think it's important to note that, we don't become a nation until we do something about it. God gave us the Torah, but in order for God to give us the Torah, the Talmud says that Moses had to go ascend to the heavens and get it. In fact, the Talmud has a beautiful exchange between Moses and the angels, because the angels saw Moses ascending to the heavens, which is again reflective of how we ought to ascend to receive the Torah. It doesn't just fall on us. We have to really make an effort. We have to connect to God. It has to create this change in us. So Moses ascends to the heavens, and then the angels say, hey, who's this guy? What's he doing here? A man of flesh and blood? What is he doing here among us in the heavens? And God said, well, he came to receive the Torah. And the angels protested, said, what? A man of flesh and blood comes to receive the Torah? You should bestow your glory upon the heavens. God, the Torah is the most treacherous, the most precious thing you have, the greatest treasure you have. Give it to the heavens. Human beings are going to defile it. Now, as they proclaim. And God said to Moses, you know what? You respond to them. What was Moses going to respond? He says, I can't. First of all, they're going to consume me with the fire. So God says, don't worry, hold on to my throne of glory, and then they won't be able to do anything. So he holds on to his throne of glory. And then Moses says to them, 1 second, what does it say in the Torah? I am the Lord that took you out of Egypt. Did you even go down to Egypt, angels? Then what else does it say? That you should respect your parents? Do you even have parents to respect? The Torah was given, obviously, for the human beings, not for angels. And by that, Moses won the argument. But I think it goes back again to this big idea that we're reading about, at least that Rabbi Schnells is hinting to, and that is that indeed the Torah was given for us as bodies, not just for us as souls. And the Torah, therefore, comes to refine the body. The soul doesn't really need refinement. The body does. And therefore, the Torah is given for the body, and it speaks a bodily language. Respect your parents, or took you out of Egypt, or eat this way, not that way, or give tzedakah with your hand. Open up your hand. It relates to the body, again, to refine that body so that we can become one with it. And when the body eats that bread and food, then, or that delicacy, then it becomes one with God in a way. Yeah. I would love to hear your comments or ideas, agreement. All right. Okay, let's continue maybe then a little more, 151, for just as physical bread.
Should I continue?
Yeah, why not, Margot? Go for
Okay.
it.
For just as physical bread nourishes the body by entering into the person within his very inner self, where it is transformed into blood and flesh of his flesh, whereby he lives and exists. Food is ingested in 2 stages. In the first stage, the food enters within the person and is digested. In the second, it ceases to be a distinct entity within the person and becomes blood and flesh of his flesh. So too, it is within the knowledge of the Torah with its comprehension by the soul of the person who studies it well with a concentration of his mind. This is the first stage in which the concept enters the mind and is chewed and digested. The idea is transferred from the shape in which it exists outside of that person to the form in which that person absorbs it by being broken down to its particulars and processed by the mind. When a person thus toils over the Torah concept, working it over until his mind grasps it, he achieves the next stage in which the Torah is absorbed by his mind and is united with it. The concept has become part and parcel of the structure of his mind and thought process.
Right. I think so. So, if I may, I want to take this in a slightly different direction, and I think that's also part of the brilliance of Rabbi Steinsaltz, who, after all, we're learning his commentary, so it's worth stating his life mission. His life mission was, as we've mentioned, I think, it was as summarized in the play on words, to let my people go. His life mission was to let my people know. Dedicated his life really to letting my people know, and to translating the Talmud and adding his own commentary on the Torah and the Mishnah and the Rambam and every important book in the canon of the Jewish library. But I think that Rabbi Steinsaltz did that not just to make the Torah accessible, but I think he knew the power of these words. What's the power of these words? He knew that when a person studies Torah, it triggers something. And when it triggers something, who's to tell where that will end, if it will ever end? And he knew the power of these words, because just like food, when I eat something, it has an impact, whether we want it or not. Thus you have today 20,000 types of diets you can take because of the food that can be contaminating or not. So it has an impact. And sometimes it toxifies you, and sometimes it helps you. But food has an impact. And even more so, the food that the Torah has an impact. And of course, it has a healthy impact, not a toxifying one, maybe a detoxifying one, or maybe a healthy one. But he knew that. And therefore, he dedicated his life to letting my people know, knowing that that's not where it stops. That when people know, then they'll want to involve themselves. They want to refine themselves. They want to change the world in many ways. And in a way, that's really the power. You have the study of the Torah and of this food that we're eating. That knowing that there's no way we can ever underestimate the study of Torah, even for 1 minute. I know that speaking about wars in Israel, but in 1967, when the world had already predicted Israel's death just before the 6-day war, and Jews across the world were in complete anguish and not know exactly what will happen. After all, Israel was being completely overpowered by at least 6 Arab countries and their armies, and the Israeli tiny little the state of Israel, the size of New Jersey, they say, right, had no way to overpower this might. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson of blessed memory, stood strong. And first of all, he comforted the nation, saying that God will make us successful, and was right. And then he launched his Tefillin campaign. And his Tefillin campaign was, as we all know, right, where he would ask as many people to put on Tefillin. And he would tell his students, stop the Jews in the streets and put on Tefillin. And he was ostracized by people because of that. Now, why? Because they were saying to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, what, you think that this Tefillin campaign is really going to change people? They put Tefillin on. First of all, who knows what the state of their body is, or the state of their mind is, or the state of their soul is when they put on Tefillin? And they put it on just to do you a favor, and then they continue on with their lives. You really think it's going to change people? But the Rebbe believed in these words of the Tanya. So did Rabbi Steinsaltz, and so did any giant. That when you do a mitzvah, it triggers something. It creates a ripple effect that no one is to know what the long-term effect it can have. And That's because we're eating. The study of Torah and actualization of Torah is an act of eating. And just like physical food has its own impact, so too does spiritual food, and even more so. But I think that's another thing to take into consideration as we hear these words. Never shy away from doing just one mitzvah, and never shy away from having someone else do just one mitzvah or study just one passage of the Torah, because that in of itself can create a positive change to eternity. Okay. So that's why the Torah is called Torah. Torah means multiple things in Hebrew. It means to teach, comes from the word hora'ah, or even mora, right? Mora, the female version for teacher. So Torah is the same word. Torah also, I think we've mentioned this in the past, but Torah also comes from the word guidance, lehorot, not just to teach, but to guide, because indeed it is a guide, it's a GPS. But Torah also comes from the word light, or. And in Hebrew, there are really two words for or. There's or for light, sorry, there's or, and then there's what's called ma'or, the source of light. So you have the rays of the sun and you have the sun itself, for example. And the Torah, the word Torah includes both words. In a way, it is the source of light, or as Rabbi Steinsaltz would often say, Torah did not come from heaven, it is heaven. That's one. So it's the source itself. And at the same time, it also has the rays. It has the impact, the effect that we're talking about. So when one studies Torah, he fills himself both with the source of light and with the light itself. And it's like the power station and the light bulb itself. So imagine hooking yourself up to a power station, how electrifying that is. Well, that's what we do when we study Torah, really. And it's in the word itself. I think it's very much connected, of course. I mean, it's no coincidence we're studying this now because Shavuot is coming up tonight for 2 days. By the way, I want to remind everyone that we'll have an all-night learnathon. An email is coming up this morning, soon. And we'll have the pleasure of having Rabbi Eisen also lead us with one of the sessions. But the whole purpose of Shavuot was really to connect heaven and earth together. Before Shavuot, earth was earth, heaven was heaven, and they weren't connected. Even when you did a mitzvah, you did something good in the world, but it didn't have an heavenly element to it. When God came down on Mount Sinai, he bridged heaven and earth together. That's why it says that the voices of God had no echo. Kol gadol velo yasaf. Now, how could it be that the voices of God had no echo when he spoke the first two commandments? He spoke them in mountains. When you speak to mountains, you hear your echo back. The voice, comes back to you. But God's voice did not go back. That didn't have an echo. Why? It's because when, at least according to the Kabbalists, when God spoke his voice on Mount Sinai, that voice permeated the world. It didn't have an echo because an echo is the voice bouncing back. Yeah, the voice permeated the world, permeated the rocks, permeated the mountains. Why did God need to do that? Because that was the essence of the giving of the Torah, that God bridged heaven and earth. They became almost one entity. Yes, it's true that earth still is earth, but it's up to us to turn earth into heaven, because it has now, since Mount Sinai, it has sparks of heaven within it. It has the voice of God within it. And that's what the Torah comes to do. Torah doesn't come again to refine the soul. It comes to nourish the soul, but at the same time also to unify the body with God and to unify the world with God. That's the essence of Shavuot, really. That's the idea of Shavuot. When we accept the Torah anew tomorrow morning with the 10 Commandments and invite everyone to come to Shul to relive that moment and listen to the 10 Commandments, and that's what we're doing. We're not just listening to 10 Commandments, 10 rules, but what we're doing is that we're bridging ourselves to the heavens, and the heavens are bridging themselves to us, to the world. That's the Torah becoming one with the body, not just with the soul.
Rabbi, I'd like to share with you today's session. I heard it with different ears that I've ever heard before, and it's given me an appreciation for Torah
Yeah.
that I never had before.
Right. Thank you for sharing that, Ronnie. Yeah. I mean, you know that the Tanya says elsewhere, I think in chapter 27, but if we knew the power of Torah and mitzvot, which is really one, then we would constantly do them. And the power is such, the description of Rabbi Shneur Zalman V'Liadi based on the Zohar, that it creates such a light that the angels tremble before it, and it makes such a noise in the heavens that then creates blessings that are showered upon us in return. But that's what it is. When you connect to a power station, it creates a lot of noise. It creates a lot of light and makes the angels tremble. Yeah. You know, the Talmud says, I don't know, with medical advice or without medical advice, but the Talmud has a whole line of medical symptoms. For example, if someone has a headache, chash berosho, as it says, then ya'asok b'Torah, then one should study Torah. If someone has this medical symptom, he should study Torah. This medical symptom, he should study Torah. It's like the study of Torah is the master key or the magical potion.
It's a portal. It's an absolute portal.
The portal. There you go. But in a way, I mean, I don't know, again, if it's consistent medicine, and certainly you should definitely listen to the doctors and follow their instructions too. Yeah. But in a way, it certainly is as a good medicine for even for the body, as we are learning here, because it creates that light. It's a connection to the power station. Yeah. I mean, there's a verse in Psalm 19 by King David that says, Torat Hashem temima meshivat nafesh, pikudei Hashem yesharei mesamechei lev, that the Torah of God is complete and it soothes the soul. Soothes the soul. And then it says that the mitzvahs of God, pikudei Hashem yesharim, they are straight and they rejoice the heart. And in a way, that's the medicine, that it soothes the soul and it brings joy to the heart. Yeah. And it's true, I mean, especially in our day and age, if I may add, that we're so bombarded by so many news and worldly affairs, that the Torah provides for us this ability to soar and to lift ourselves away from and above all of these worldly affairs and really connect to the divine. It's nothing more soothing to the soul than that, especially in our day and age. Yeah. Rabbi Eisen, please, yes.
There was, I'm looking for it, I can't find it in a quick Google, but there was in the 1980s, I think, there was a book which came out called Mind and Body. I think that was the title, which spoke about the interconnection between sort of attitude and our existence in the world. And it talked about how stress and other kinds of psychological upset impact on our systems, especially our immune systems. And that the more one is at peace, the greater chance one has of finding peace, so to speak. And these great studies, you can't do a clinical study on it, but I remember one of the most startling chapters to me was a study which was done in Boston, where women who had breast cancer were studied, and those who were in support groups, where they were able to speak with others who had real empathy and real understanding of what was going on, had a higher survival rate and a longer survival rate than those who tried to go it alone. And so the idea of Torah being a, quote, I want to say cure, but I think what the Gemara and the rabbis are saying is it may not cure, but it may heal, that it may give us a certain sense of peace. And if you think of the, quote, euphoria, which comes from a significant study session, the fact that we found a little bit of peace, that can calm down our whole physical being and perhaps give us the strength to overcome the stresses of the physical body, or at least to embrace them and become one with them, and find a little bit of healing, not curing, but healing. Those are two things. That's my take on it.
Right. No, that's beautiful. Really, really beautiful. Yeah. I mean, I've no doubt, yeah, that these statistics reflect the truth. I will add maybe another layer, and I think that the difference is, though, that when we study Torah, we're really studying something that we already know. In heaven we study Torah. In the womb of our mothers, the Talmud says we study Torah. So it's really going back to our true selves. And by doing so, I think then we are ridding ourselves of the deceptive self-definitions we may have given ourselves in life. So by going back to the study of the Torah, we're saying, oh, okay, now I know who I am. This is who I am. And this refers to divine. That's who I am. I'm divine. I'm one with God. And that in of itself sheds, I think, all of these other deceptive self-definitions. I thought I was this. I thought I was my business card. I thought I was my medical diagnosis. I thought I was a fool. No, studying Torah, and then you remind yourself of who you truly are. And I think that there's nothing more soothing to the soul than that. The soul wants to be the soul. And when you redefine yourself as a soul, then, oh, thank you. Soothing.
Most beautiful. Again, very touching for me today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
It's true.
Thank you. Yeah. So, the Hasidic Jews, hundreds of years already, I think it was coined by the Baal Shem Tov, would wish one another during this festival of Shavuot that we should merit to receive the Torah, Kabbalat Torah, besimcha ubepnimiyut, with happiness and with internalization, pnimiyut. And again, we're speaking about the study of the Torah, and it's no coincidence that we're today. It's the eve of Shavuot, the day in which we received the Torah new. So I think what is needed after listening to all of this and really studying these powerful words of the Tanya and of Rabbi Steinsaltz is that we receive the Torah with happiness, of course, and we're happy to connect ourselves to God himself and define ourselves by that, but also we have to internalize it. That's a whole different process. But internalizing that this is who we are, internalizing that no matter what we experience, we are one with God, and internalizing that oneness with God creates a positive change, and we have to allow it to happen. As Rabbi Steinsaltz would say, God gave us the Torah, and our only task is not to get in the way. Just don't get in the way. Let him do his job. That's what happened on Shavuot. God came down the mountain and he gave us the Torah. Now, don't get in the way. Don't let your ego get in the way. You don't get in the way. Just absorb it all. Internalize it.